Hey, buenas tardes. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Bueno, I'm Rafael Medina, Director of Media Relations at the Center for American Progress, and I'd like to thank everybody for being here today, and everybody who's on our online audience. As we continue to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, the Center for American Progress is very excited to be hosting this event today regarding how the Biden administration is deploying funds from his signature legislation, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, to chart a path for Latinos to achieve more equitable outcomes in the job market, healthcare, clean energy, and infrastructure. As we all know, the policy choices of the past have at times caused more harm than good, displacing entire communities, excluding people of color from home ownership, and underinvesting in the healthcare and education of Black and Brown people. However, President Biden has so far upheld his promise to confront our nation's ugly past by taking a whole of the government approach to racial equity, redressing consequential harms of the past with actions that are improving the lives of Latinos across America. For example, Latino marketplace enrollment has doubled in 2 years. The economy has added 4 million jobs for Latino workers, and the Latino unemployment rate fell to its lowest on record. And the administration continues to invest in Latino communities, from broadband access to transportation to small businesses, clean energy, and job training. Taken together, the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Investment Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act have the potential to be incredibly transformative, but only if this money is getting to the communities that need it, and it can continue to chip away at the disparities that have existed for far too long. Today's event will explore exactly that, how the Biden administration is making smart investments to create more opportunities for Latinos to fully integrate themselves into the clean energy future, close healthcare disparities, revitalize their communities, and build a more inclusive economy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Laura Rodriguez, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress, to introduce our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rafa. That was an excellent introduction and great context for the conversation we're about to have. It is really an honor to have Emi Ruiz here and Francis Colon with us to talk about exactly what Rafa was saying, which are these incredible investments that don't happen by accident. We are in a moment that is unprecedented. Our President Biden has made these investments, not just, of course, to help all Americans, but there are pieces here that are very much targeted to the Latino community, to the Black and Brown community. And it's something that we want to dig into a little bit as we have our chat today. We're going to just talk through, as Rafa mentioned, the CHIPS and Science Act, the IIJA, and the IRA. With that, let me just do a very brief introduction of my incredible panelists up here. So, as I said, Emi Ruiz is the assistant to the president and White House director of political strategy and outreach for the Biden-Harris administration. She's one of us and one of you. I would say the one thing that actually really I wanted to highlight from your bio is that you started off as an organizer. And that is now, a lot of folks forget, in order to get where you are, this is the best way to do it. You bring the people together and you get the movement going. So thank you for all you did there. And she has an incredible background. I won't go through the whole thing, but campaign aide to Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary Clinton, Barack Obama, the list goes on and on. So we're very honored to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. And then, of course, our very own Francis Colon, who is our Senior Director for International Climate Policy at American Progress, and she leads the program to drive international ambition and action to meet global climate mitigation and adaptation goals. If I went through all of her accolades and all the things she went, we'd be here all day. But we'll just say Francis is a pioneer and has been for some time in the international climate space, both in the Obama administration and just in her fellowships throughout her time in her career. So with that, thank you so much, Francis, also for being here. I'm going to go ahead and start with just one question here. I'm going to start with Francis, who's our environmental guru on environmental justice. So Latinos are in the US are 165% more likely to live in counties with unhealthy levels of particulate matter pollution and are 3 times more likely to die from asthma than white people. There are investments in IIJA and IRA that aim to lower that pollution. What does this mean for the Latino communities?
I mean, what we're talking about, those stats are exactly right. What we're talking about is there has been historical disinvestment in these communities. We're talking about communities that have suffered from a lot of unfair policies, redlining and more. Almost 2 million Latinos live half a mile from an industry or an oil refinery that emits high levels of pollution. The investments that this White House was able to get for these communities mean that we could start to address things, but in concert with communities, right? Justice 40 means 40% of the benefits of all these programs that we're going to talk about go to these communities. It means that some of these investments specifically target cleaning up communities, port communities. Let's be real, these communities have lived right next to these pollution sites, have had higher levels of asthma, higher levels associated with cancer. This is what we're doing. We're working with communities to decrease pollution levels, to clean up, to address these public health nightmares in these communities, but to give communities the chance to partner with the government through these investments. Specifically, in Colorado and Nevada, we have air quality monitoring programs that communities are running themselves so that they can hold government accountable, so that we can make the right investments, and so families know what they're dealing with. So it's information, it's access, and it's investments in something we never had before.
Thank you, Francis. So, I mean, all of that, like I said in the beginning, none of this happens by accident. I'd love to get kind of your take on the behind the scenes, why this is important to the president and how this all came about under his leadership and the team's leadership.
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Lara, and entire CAP team for having me and for, being on this panel with Francis. It is a real honor for me. I want to thank so many of you for all the work that you've done to support and uplift the administration. One of the many reasons why I'm so proud to work in the Biden-Harris administration and under President Biden is, Laura, to your point, this does not happen by accident. This is a real vision of what America looks like that is equitable for all of our communities. It's what he campaigned on. It is what he has done and said from day one. And I think that there are, as much as we talk about facts and dollars and jobs and this and that, I think there's important pieces here to talk about in terms of symbolism and the values that the president expels, right? So like the very first thing when he moved into the Oval Office, we were talking about organizers. There's a bust of, Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers, right? The dignity of fighting for your job and fighting for the rights for not just yourself, but for others. There's the cabinet that the president assembled with Javier Becerra, with Miguel Cardona, with Isabel Guzman. It's his senior team at the White House and people that are in very important positions around his orbit, right? If we step outside the official sidewalks, if you look at his campaign, it's run by Julie Chavez Rodriguez. If you look at organizations that really represent the president's values, like done by Myra, right? So these are very important signs and symbols, and it doesn't happen by accident. This is led by the president, who is always asking us for more. Are we taking this directly to the communities? Is this being led by the communities? Are we undoing some of the, I think backwards policies that have been in place for far too long? And who is in these rooms, right? Who is he meeting with? Who is informing this policy? And I think it really all makes a difference and it all adds up.
Thank you. And that's exactly right. Moving on to another but related subject on climate resiliency. We saw this summer hit just an incredible amount of pain in so many communities across the country, whether it was floods, hurricanes, heat dome over Texas, your home state. I'd love to hear from you all, and maybe, Emmy, I'll start with you this time, how Latino communities are experiencing this unique kind of impact where we are right now, and how do the federal investments prepare them for the reality that we're going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a few things here. I mean, I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, which is part of the hurricane zone, right, in South Texas. And so for me, I have a vivid reminder of going back home after I was a field organizer in 2008 and seeing the devastation of Hurricane Dolly. I know that feels like such a long time ago, and people were without electricity for days. And this is a heavy Latino community that honestly did not get the quick support that we needed from our state or other leaders, right? And so this is something that I think has also been ongoing and impacting so many of our communities. I mean, you look at Puerto Rico under, the former administration and some of the resources that were out there. I will say a few things. A few years ago, the president met with Latino civil rights leaders. And there in one meeting, somebody asked, "What do you want your legacy to be, Mr. President?" And he talked about addressing the challenge that is climate change and ensuring that we are leaving a better world behind for future generations. And I think when you look at that, when you look at the policies that have been had, and when you look at the crisis that is just staring us in these eyes, it has really forced the government to adjust quickly in how we're responding across the board. The president convened his cabinet to talk about how are we providing resources, what rules can move, and how can they move quicker to better support workers, especially in states like Texas, where Republicans have rolled back the ability to take a water break for construction workers. In places like Arizona, working with Governor Hobbs, who Arizona unfortunately saw hundreds of people die because of the extreme heat, right? We look at the flooding, I mean, just this past weekend in places like New York City. And so this is really something that is completely ongoing. The president has made it a key pillar in working with legislators up and down federal or state level, but also on the international level. When he is meeting, for example, at UNGA, which we were at 2 weeks ago, and making sure that, addressing the climate crisis is front and center.
Thanks. And Francis, wonder if you wanted to add anything to that. And as I know, you look at the real impacts of these things.
Yeah. What Emmy said about Puerto Rico just made me think about how far we've come since 2017, during that devastating hurricane, where the electrical grid completely collapsed. And my family was there, and I didn't hear from them for 2 days. Right. And now we're looking at investments in electric grid reliability. Electric grids that can transport power into homes that comes from renewable energy, something that was unimaginable 10 years ago in Puerto Rico, right? So these are the types of things. The investments that go into making homes better able to withstand impacts. Let's be honest, we are looking at a next couple of years world where we're going to see a lot of these impacts, from flooding to extreme heat to droughts, and we have to be ready. And one of the ways to be ready is to make our homes stronger. So the funding going into HUD to make affordable homes more resilient, the funding going into programs in communities to make them more walkable, more accessible, so that our communities, nuestras comunidades, can use public transport, okay, to make it accessible. That's what it's about. It's about lowering the cost of energy. Latino households have one of the highest energy burdens in the country. That means they pay higher amounts for their energy than other households, white households, and more, okay? If we lower the price of energy, if we lower the cost for families, we are making our Latino communities able to stretch the dollar farther, much farther. And so that's what it means. It's economic resilience. It's resilience of our homes. It's resilience of our ability to get around, to be able to face what's coming.
Thank you for the Spanglish.
Ya tú
sabes. Very important in a discussion during our HHM month. Spanglish is the new everything.
That's in Spanglish.
Thank you. So moving on real quickly to clean energy jobs. A lot of these investments that have been made in creating the new economy are a very new pathway to economic independence for a lot of communities. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the importance of creating these pathways is for specifically for Latinos, and how the administration is trying to target those communities for those jobs and that training.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. I mean, I think like the president has really done a lot of work to make sure that the economy begins to turn a corner, right? We acknowledge that the last few years have been really tough, but under this president, there's been record job creation with, more than, I think, 13, 14 million jobs created, many of which have gone to Latinos, more than 4 million. We were seeing the lowest unemployment rate amongst Latinos than ever before. And again, this stuff doesn't happen by accident. However, it's not just the jobs are being created, right? I think it matters what kind of jobs are being created. And I'll say two things. One is that this economy is rapidly changing and rapidly transforming. Part of this is a climate crisis. Part of this is that, the jobs that existed, for example, when my parents were deep in the workforce, are very different. They're changing, whether they be factories, whether it be, the coal mines in places like West Virginia. Jobs are shifting. We see this right now, for example, with the UAW strike, right? And how, again, the economy, the jobs, the type of jobs are shifting. And so what the administration has done is a few things through some of the different bills that have been passed, whether it be the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, is not just making sure that these jobs are going to different places across the country that are, I think, diverse, where they have a lot of communities like Latino communities, but that one is that they also have, good benefits packages, that the companies and the grants are also being tied to equity, right? That, also who's being hired to execute these grants, which companies are able to bid, how are we working with the Small Business Administration to elevate businesses that might not generally be competitive in these sort of markets. And so it's really doing a lot to take different steps. The other part that I was going to say about this is that, the president, one of the things that he's most proud of, and I think you hear him say this a lot, is he's the most pro-union president in history. And I think that all of these things are very tied together, right? It is not just about a job. It is about a good paying job. It is about job security. It is about a job with benefits. It is about the dignity of being able to provide for your family, of planning for your future. And that's really something that is instituted in every single thing that the administration does.
Yes, and a little bit of a plug for our CAP investment tracker here. We have been tracking all of this, and from what we can tell, just so far, the IRA has spurred an estimated 28.5 billion in clean energy investments and created over 35,000 new clean energy jobs in Latino communities alone. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Francis.
Yeah, just these jobs are in Arizona, Texas, California, Nevada, in our communities, creating opportunity for our communities. And that's not coincidence. This was, in my opinion, policy genius. If you really think about how they've managed to make sure that the benefits go where they're needed, where we've disinvested, it's not a coincidence that those jobs are going where they're most needed. This was carefully thought out, and I think that's major props to this White House for thinking so carefully, being so thoughtful about crafting the policies that would benefit our communities.
Thank you, Francis. Now, this one's a little more, I think, less known and an interesting topic for us to talk about, which is nature access. So the USDA recently announced $1 billion in competitive grants that are made possible by the IRA as part of the Justice 40 initiative. Can you, Francis, talk a little bit about why this very specific program is such an important one for Latino communities at this point?
So I'm a resident of Florida, of South Florida, and one of the interesting things about living there is that it's very hard to find the trees, and it's very hard to find the parks. And it's interesting because as soon as you move from my neighborhood into a slightly more higher middle class neighborhood or above, hay muchos árboles, muchos. Qué casualidad. So look, we're experiencing tremendous heat impacts. Let's think about just the extreme heat waves. One of the ways in which communities can deal with extreme temperatures is having parks, having tree cover. But communities of color have a third less of the tree cover that other communities do. Communities without trees can have heat island effects, where the heat is magnified, could be up to 22 degrees more than a comparable community with tree cover not that far away. This isn't coincidence. Okay, it's happened through these policies that disinvested in communities for many years. So part of the investments here that Laura is talking about are to make nature accessible again, to bring tree cover, to provide relief into our communities.
Thank you, Frances. Emmy, anything to add on this kind of specific push to really greenify Latino areas? And I know exactly what you're talking about, Frances, being also from South Florida. I mean, and I think that's probably true across the country, where you can see, the Coral Gables right next to, Little Havana, and you're like, wait, what is the difference here? Oh,
You went there.
this I did. These people have a lot more money over here in Coral Gables. So, and I love you, Coral Gables, but you got a lot of trees. You got more than your fair share. So I'd love to hear from you about this program. Like I said, throughout the country, I think that's a pretty common occurrence.
Unfortunately, I think don't take this one because thank you. I mean, I would say again, the theme is that these kinds of things don't happen by accident. And I would say two things. One, I agree, right? We all agree. It doesn't, you can drive through the different quadrants of the city even. And in Northwest, there are the most beautiful giant trees. I think I have a dead tree in front of my house. That probably we need to call like 311 to remove, right? And it's just a difference in neighborhood. Sorry. What I would say, I think this is an area that we're really proud of as well in the administration, because I think it really highlights some of our partnership with mayors in some of these key cities that are very representative of the diversity in this country and the effort to beautify our communities, to create more access for parks. And as we all know, like this is all intertwined to mental health, to keeping, kids off the streets, to creating safe spaces for them to go after school, for having, I think a safe place to go. I love parks because I think that they're a great equalizer. No matter what city you go to, no matter what park you go to, whether you go to Maryland or Virginia, I take a lot of joy in going to parks because I see immigrants like my families that are there enjoying our parks and having a nice family time. And so I would say that this really highlights our partnership with mayors across the city. And again, I think that this is a big part of how we've been able to move so many of these things so quickly.
Thank you. So we're going to take a little bit of a turn and let us know if you need a break.
I'm okay.
You're good.
Great.
Okay. We're going to take a little bit of a turn. We've talked a lot about the environmental investments and impacts for Latino families from these bills. Let's talk a little bit about healthcare. We all know, I think in this room, Latinos are some of the most underinsured, or population very much uninsured or underinsured in this country. And the president and his team, you all have made it so that you've very much targeted that community so that they do have the health care that they need. And specifically in the IRA, it enables Medicare to negotiate drug prices for some of the most expensive drugs. Pharma does not love that, but we're okay with that. It's incredibly necessary. And in this country, we pay more for drugs probably than in many other places for the same drugs. Can you talk a little bit about what that particular policy within the IRA to negotiate Medicare prices, what that means for Latino communities?
I mean, it's a game changer, right? And I would say a few different things of how it impacts our communities and our families from a practical way. On the high level, I will say that I think it's important to note that the president has accomplished something that many administrations have tried to do and have been unable to accomplish. President Joe Biden delivered on this, even in this tightest of margin in Congress, is the ability to negotiate prices. But then if you look at the cost of insulin, right? So there are many examples here. But how does that trickle down to our families? I remember being a canvasser, being an organizer, knocking on doors. Healthcare is something that comes up on many doors for various reasons, whether it's us that is experiencing something with the health insurance companies, or lack of health insurance, or lack of benefits, or somebody we care about, or our parents, or our children, right? Again, I keep coming back to this word that the president uses often. It's that word of dignity, and giving people the dignity of being able to care for their loved ones, being able to care for their kids, and being able to cover insulin costs, right? The basic necessities to survive. And so, I'll say a few more things. One is, Big Pharma sued the White House. Welcome. That is a welcome fight that we will continue to have. And we know that this is something that's very, very, very popular with the American people. Second, it impacts the bottom line, right? It impacts the bottom line of what is going in and out of people's bank accounts, of what they're able to cover, of their opportunities as they look ahead to plan for their future, of what is within that realm. The other thing I'll say is that, as you all have seen, it has allowed the administration to go and negotiate on more drugs than even we were anticipating, at a faster rate, because we know that this is so popular. It's also pushing the different companies, I think, to take some leadership, to take some initiative, and begin to lower costs across the board. And so I think that this is, I will say, for us, this is the beginning of the fight. We're going to continue to push on this. And as the president said in the State of the Union address, as he says in so many of remarks, we are just beginning this fight with Big Pharma, and we're going to keep going until it is more equitable, until it is affordable, until our families and our communities do not have to cross the borders to get the healthcare that they need.
Thank you, Emmy. Francis. I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to add. I know that, for example, just in general, Latino communities and Latinos tend to suffer from more chronic illnesses. So the healthcare in general has just always been of a particular problem for the Latino community. So I'm curious, if you had any thoughts on that, but also, from either one of you, on how to help the community. How do we make sure that they know about it, hear about it, are taking advantage of these programs?
I'll let Emmy talk about, I know there's tremendous efforts to get all of this information in the hands of our communities, but I think what I would say is this is extremely welcome at a time where we are facing a lot of the impacts of climate and environmental injustice in our communities are health impacts. And we've lived with them for a long time, not knowing that we didn't have to, not knowing that, I always say, my mother and her generation say this phrase a lot to me when I say, this is terrible. This shouldn't be like this. We need to do this. You guys need to do X. You need to do Y. And she says something along these lines. Pero mija, es que aquí las cosas son así. But my daughter, things are like that here. And how long have we lived con las cosas son así? They don't have to be like that. And I think that this is what these investments allow us to break with.
I think in terms of getting this information out, in terms of getting these resources out, as I think Rafa mentioned, access to, affordable care has, more than 900,000 Latino enrollments. doubled by more than 50% enrollment. These things require a lot of work and a lot of partnership, including with organizations like CAP, including like organizations that are here. I would point to one really great example of the approach the administration is taking. Many of y'all will remember a time long ago when it was very difficult to get the COVID vaccine. It was very, very, very difficult. And what the president demanded of the cabinet was to work with local municipalities and to shape a strategy that looked like that community, right? So in places like New Mexico, it had a very strong rural approach. It had, approach that was tailored to the Native community, to making sure that, we were going to not just where people are, but everywhere they are, right? And so that is really the approach that we have taken here. But we've also gone further. Thanks to some of these bills that have been passed, there have been more clinics that have been established. There has been more investment through, for example, the Department of Education, so that there are more Latino healthcare providers, that our communities feel comfortable, feel safe, feel that it is accessible to them. And so, we are doing a lot of work for there to be outreach. I mean, in schools, in, places of, community centers, in churches, wherever the place people go, for them to know that these benefits are there for them, that there are these resources to help guide them through a process, to help give them information. And, we're actively partnering with organizations at the national and local level to get that word out.
Yes, incredible work, very, purposeful. So I think the theme for the day is not by accident, right? This is all, these are all, I think you can see the through line through all of these things, which is this administration has very purposely made sure that they are reaching everyone where they are, to your point. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the premium tax credits for the healthcare marketplace that I think are also impacting Latinos very heavily in a good way.
Yeah, look, we have tried to find as many opportunities as possible to lower costs for the American people, to lower costs for our communities, whether it is through the premium tax rate, whether it is through, how these healthcare packages are assembled, whether it is creating more incentives for employers or small businesses to be able to provide these types of resources. This is just something that we have been really, really, really dogged on. I think we saw the challenges that the Affordable Healthcare, the Affordable Care Act went through, not just in the Obama years, but during the Trump administration, and the work that they did to try to dismantle it or to really scrape it down to the bones. And so our administration has really tried to do the actual reverse of that, sign more people up, give more incentives, give more opportunities for people to see not just the benefit of healthcare, but the fact that they can have affordable healthcare with, an affordable rate lower than in many cases had been before, and to try to continue to expand that.
Okay.
Just a small plug for Winning the Wins. In South Florida, which we've been accused for trending less and less progressive with time, has the highest enrollment of Obamacare in the country. How do we square that?
Thank you, Governor DeSantis.
So,
That's a joke.
let's take advantage of that.
Excellent point. And I do think, we probably can't get too into the weeds on the messaging so much we are in this space, our CAP space, but making sure that I think folks know where it comes from is going to be something that we all are going to be working towards together.
And who's trying to stand in the way?
That's right. That's right. The contrast.
Yep.
Very important. So I'm going to switch over a little bit into the transit and infrastructure area. So the administration and Democrats passed the major COVID relief package, and that included $30.5 billion for transit providers. So this money ensured that local transit agencies could continue to offer services in the face of reduced ridership in the pandemic. So that then, of course, now that we've shifted to a post-COVID world, those investments, though, are still there. And a lot of it was made in the infrastructure, in the cities, in the communities where we needed them. So you talk a little bit about how that's impacted the community as well.
I mean, I think it's created many more opportunities, right? It has created in many places job stability of knowing that there are those funds there so that people can continue to do their jobs. Stability in being able to get to your job if you are a consumer, if you are a participant, or allowing you opportunities to get your kids where they're going, your family members, going about your business, whatever that might be. Those are two things. I think the other piece of this, I think, and Francis would be much better equipped to speak to this, is like the environmental factors of being able to invest long-term in these infrastructure pieces, right? That are saying this is not temporary. Could not come crashing down. We are invested in the long haul. And beyond investments are, I think, incentives, right? To continue to do that. And I think we've seen it just in places where probably many of you where you live, right? DC residents now can ride the bus for free. And so it also creates these leverage points for cities to move around their investments, to create, I think, more opportunities for people to take advantage of these benefits.
You're good with that.
Ride the bus.
And the train.
And the train. I mean, just
you ride your bikes. Yeah. No, that's great. I do think that as we think about how all these pieces fit together, when you look at it all, right, it's like you're creating opportunities for new careers. You're creating ways to get to those new careers. You're creating ways to be able to take advantage of these and lowering costs. I mean, it's pretty incredible what these bills have done. And on the subject of getting those jobs and getting people trained up. Quick question about unions and how they fit into all of this, because as we know, the president is incredibly invested in making sure that we have strong unions across the country, that people have job protections. It's no accident that unions are more popular right now than they have been in 50 years, and kind of riding that wave to ensure that they are part of this process. Can you talk a little bit about that effort?
I would love to. I mean, if I could just go back to, though, on the infrastructure piece, that I think the transportation piece, I also think it's really important because I think it also allows the future to dream of what could be possible. Right. I grew up in a very small town where, I mean, I loved it. I have zero complaints. It was truly a magical childhood. But when I was able to travel elsewhere, it just really opened up my imagination and my opportunities for the future. We should also see that in so much of the benefits and so many of the investments. It is not just about, yes, the dignity, as I said, yes, about the day-to-day. Yes, it is about making the routine possible. And what is necessary to, survive the day-to-day. But it is also about dreams and possibilities and opportunities, which brings me to unions. And look, the president, this is my favorite thing to say, is very proud to be the most pro-union president in history. And he is somebody that truly lives his values day in and day out as it pertains to this piece and all pieces. But what I mean by that is that every single thing that we do in the administration, every single effort, every single statement, every single trip, the question is, how is this benefiting working people? How is this benefiting and building and expanding from the inside out, the middle class, from the middle out, right? And every single thing that we do. And so that has been a true partnership that we've had with unions. It's been, I think, a real important, compass that we've been very clear with our partnerships in the private sector, right, with companies. I don't think anybody is surprised on where Joe Biden stands. And it's something that wherever possible, the administration has prioritized, whether it's investments in chips, in electric vehicles, in, as I mentioned earlier, the UAW negotiations, whether it be, I think we saw this with the Teamsters and their negotiations and their day-to-day, and reminding people who built this country. And so, I think it's a big priority for us. I think it's something that we also need to do a lot more of, so that these members and these working people know exactly where the president stands versus, other elected officials, and making sure that we're very clear in drawing that fine line in the sand.
Thank you so much. I think it is now time for questions. We'd love to hear from, Joel back there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe Martinez, Senior Policy Analyst here at CAP. Thank you all so much for this great panel. My question was alongside the information and sort of the messaging coming out of the White House. Obviously, we know that the impact of these investments are significant, and they're definitely, beneficial to these communities. But we know that, less and less disinformation. Obviously, you mentioned that the administration is working closely with communities to make sure that this information is out there and people have access to it. But it seems that less and less people are accessing this information, say from your local community board, and more from online spaces, where there seems to be a disconnect with the actual wins that the administration is doing to the mis and disinformation that circles, particularly in Latino online spaces, where we know that mis and disinformation is significant. So going into 24, where we know that the Latino vote is going to be important, where we know that competitive states in those states, what is the what efforts is the administration taking out, or moving forward to make sure that there isn't that disconnect between the actual wins on the ground to the information that is circulating out there, both in English and in Spanish?
Well, we have a lot of work to do. Joe, thank you for your question. I'll start by saying we have done a lot, as you all have heard me say. And we're very proud of what we have accomplished, but that is only part of the work, right? The other part of the work is that it's very important for people to know, and to have access to these resources and these possibilities. I know that, these construction signs and this new bridge that's being fixed and this and that is thanks to the Biden-Harris administration. And so, we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that we get the word out. The president is on the road all the time. So is the vice president, the first lady, the second gentleman, the cabinet. We were just out, for example, in Phoenix last week, really delivering on a few different pieces where we talked about our overarching message, but also the topic of democracy, where we're just doing our best to break through this crazy media cycle, where there's just a lot going on, right? That's just an understatement. That's one piece of it. We're also really considering all of the different ways to communicate with the American people, whether it be, I know this is going to sound very, basic, but it be a podcast, whether it be with an influencer, whether it be a small event, a big event, whether it be, for example, going to the UAW strike, which he was the first president ever to do that, and using that as an opportunity to remind people where he stands and what he's delivered on. These are all different pieces of what we're trying to do. I would say two other components. The other component that I think is very important is the work that groups like CAP do in helping share this message. So many of our partners have different audiences, whether it be talkers, influencers, the political elites, whether it be a membership, whether it be a focus on a state like Nevada or Arizona or Georgia, et cetera, right? Every single organization that is a partner of ours has that opportunity to get that message in a way that maybe somebody else would not be able to communicate that. And that's also very important. And lastly, on the political side, and I'll say this is public information, I think it's very important to highlight that, for example, the president's reelection campaign is already on the air, delivering a message directly to Latinos on what has been accomplished in Spanish, English, and in Spanglish, right? And so really trying to get out there. Just yesterday, I believe, or the day before, they announced that they were going up on radio, right? So it's really trying to reach Latinos in different communities everywhere they are. What I have described is the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot of work that needs to occur. And it's not lost on us that more people need to know about the president's historic first term, his leadership, about what's ahead and our vision for the future. And we're actively working on it. Also, if you have any ideas, we're all ears.
Yes, and I know this is not the subject of this panel, but kudos to the campaign for going up and targeting and talking to Latinos earlier than any Democratic president has ever done.
And that's the president, by the way. This is the president who cares deeply, deeply, deeply about making sure that people know.
Hey, Billy's going to come to you with the.
Hi, folks. My name is Daniel. I'm with the operations team at CAP. One of the things you mentioned, Emmy, was that one of the major focuses of the president to support Latino communities has been focusing on climate resiliency. Obviously, climate change is not an America-only problem, and a lot of our neighbors to the south are mostly made of Latinos and Latino communities. What would you say are the biggest wins from the past few years in this administration to support climate resiliency for Latino communities beyond the United States, and for the folks who are Latinos outside of the United States who want to be in the United States?
Hi, Daniel. I think that there have been some important moments. One is on day one, the president moved for our country to join the Paris Agreement, right? And I think that was a big deal. And even if it's symbolic, or even if it is just a mutual accordance, I think it was very, very important. I would point to the work that Tony Blinken has done, the work that John Kerry has done, the work that so many of our team members that focus on foreign relations have done, and that they have really worked hard to get alignment with especially some of these bigger countries on climate goals and what needs to occur over the next few years in order to begin to make progress and even hopefully begin to reverse some of the damage that's been done. I would say the other thing that I would say about climate when we think of our neighbors to the south is that I think that climate and migration are very intertwined and are very linked up. And these are ongoing conversations that our administration is having with those governments to try to outline and determine more resources that can go, more agreements, more, progress that can be made. But I think, climate is a big part of migration as well as the economy, and just seeing where there might be some intersection there. But I would say that in everything that the president does, every, UNGA meeting, every G7 meeting, every bilat, trilat and whatnot, climate is always a big priority.
And from the online audience, can you talk about job training and how the administration is helping the Latino community access these new jobs in climate and other sectors?
I can maybe say a couple words about that. One of the things that was included, I think, in the very thoughtful development of the Inflation Reduction Act was a big part of the Inflation Reduction Act is tax credits, its incentives, so that clean energy developers will create more projects. Solar, wind, across the United States, in communities where they're welcoming these projects, in communities where it's unexpected. The majority of the projects have been announced are in red states. Let's be very clear about that. And in the language for the law, among the credits, you get a certain number of credits, certain percentage for setting up a clean energy project. And then if you do this in an affordable housing community, you get a little bit more. And then if you hire folks and pay them a prevailing wage, you get a little bit more. And then if you hire from apprenticeships, you get a little bit more. And so the whole idea was to make sure that these projects happen in communities where they're needed. So it will skew towards our low-income communities, affordable housing communities, and it will also incentivize businesses to pay fair, pay good paying jobs, because they are going to benefit from doing that, right? Think of this big climate package as something that was mostly carrots, right? For a long time, we tried to solve climate change with laws that didn't go anywhere because of the combination of carrots and sticks that were more sticks. And when this package was pulled together, and it was mostly, how do we really incentivize businesses to do better, to create jobs and projects by giving them the signals, the investments, and more, we saw this finally come to pass. And we have the largest climate package, largest climate law that affects everybody in the entire world. So maybe, Daniel, that goes to your question as well.
We have time for one more question.
Hey, my name's Melissa. My question is, would you want to go over the great work that Secretary Cardona has done for education for Latino community? Because it's been phenomenal seeing his great work.
Yeah, I would love to. And please jump in if I miss anything. I mean, look, I think it goes back to what I mentioned about it matters who's leading some of these efforts and some of these programs. Secretary Miguel Cardona from Connecticut, has led the Department of Education, I think, in a way that has really made the administration proud and has really recentered our priorities, especially, let's not even mention previous, that has made a big difference. I think there are, a few things that I would point to. Just today, we had a big announcement in terms of further student debt relief. And that's something, when we talk about breaking through, by the way, that question, I saw a survey yesterday that said the number one thing that has broken through for the administration is the student debt relief and the student debt fight, because it is a fight. This is not something that people see in the news and just keep going among their day. They really are prepared to defend it. And he's been, I think, a really great advocate in that sense. I think he has done a really great job at getting out in the country and finding opportunities to promote apprenticeships, to promote, I think, non-traditional educations, routes for different communities, for creating more pathways to good paying jobs, for really, I think, moving resources to the school districts that need them, and really just taking our message on the road. He and I think Secretary Becerra have been a great team as well, as it pertains to, mental health and the challenges that our kids are seeing. But really, he's been a champion, and we're very, very grateful. What did I miss?
Actually, I'm so glad you asked that, because dereliction of duty on my part. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was the specific, there's money that's in the CHIPS and Science Act that is specifically earmarked to go to HSIs, to Hispanic serving institutions, to make sure that when these jobs, as we all know, we don't have the workforce right now that we need to make sure that we can get this up and running. And the very targeted investments in HSIs and HBCUs for this kind of training is an incredible, it just, again, policy genius, to steal from Francis, to help make sure that the folks who need that training, who are interested in these careers, really have the opportunity to get that.
Well, the only other thing that I would say on HSIs is that I think Secretary Cardona, along with the White House, have really developed such a strong partnership. Right now, the vice president is on a college tour, right? Really taking this message directly to students. She went to an HSI, will be traveling to more, along with HBCUs and campuses across the country, where, we're seeing a lot of interest from students and educators to really lean into what has been accomplished in the road ahead.
Go FIU Panthers. She was just there.
She was just there. She had a great response.
Yes. So I think that's all the time that we have, but I just really want to thank both of you for this great conversation, bringing a little positivity and light in a very tough. It's only Wednesday. Tough news week. A little distracting to say the least, but it's good to bring back our focus to the job at hand, which is to make sure that we make these opportunities known, that we make sure that we're helping to implement, and it brings us back to our purpose, which is to make sure that we are helping the American people and helping the administration get there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you all.